Sean, you know how I'll tell you sometimes when I'm watching football, I get the old feeling I used to get as a player of a certain anxiety when there's an offense that puts you in a bind. With defensive ends, it's always versus the option game, especially the option game, the old ways, and a lot of us grew up playing against the veer option. It puts the defensive end in a bind. They're going to try to play it the right way, and it's stressful. You might have a coach that says, just hit the quarterback every time. Like, all right, great. If you're going to try to play it the right way where you have to read it, it's stressful as hell. That now with the RPOs, that's how I feel about the linebackers. And Steichen is brilliant with it. He was really good at it with Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew executed it really well. It puts the linebackers and the nickelback, when he's like Jalen Petrie basically, it puts them in unwinnable situations. It puts you in such a bind where your read has to be absolutely perfect, or Jonathan Taylor's going to rush for 188 yards.
Yeah.
The Titans, so when Alshire was a linebacker, the first game they had last year, Zach Moss ran for over 150 yards. Mm-hmm. And you're making a devil's compromise all the time. Are going to be weak versus the pass, or are we going to be weak versus the run? Last year in that Week 18 game, it felt like, just watching it again the other day, that the linebackers, the way they were being coached in that game was almost like, you're going to have to concede the run a little bit. Because the Texans linebackers last year were very eager to stop the run. It was one of the reasons that the Texans got just gored by the play action at times.
Yeah. So
in that game, it looked to me like they were really instructed to be like, you just be sure about it. Don't bite on play action. And ultimately, it was the right strategy, but it's a tough one because it involves conceding a little bit. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the old, the Hall of Fame game plan that Belichick had when he was with the Giants versus the Bills in the Super Bowl, where they just basically said, you know what? Let Thurman Thomas eat. Yeah. And Thurman Thomas might rush for 100 and however many yards he did, but we got to limit the passing game. That's the bind that D'Amico and those linebackers are in right now.
Yeah, and that's like you said, Jonathan Taylor ran for like 200 yards in that second game against them in Week 18. They stopped him when they needed to, though. They did stop him when they needed to. They slowed him down in the fourth quarter. From what you're saying, it sounds like if we're looking for pressure points on the Texans defense, Jalen Petrie under a tremendous amount of pressure this weekend. Probably Henry To'oTo'o, right? I mean, that's going to be a kill spot for Shane Steichen, right? Yeah,
the linebackers, and for these purposes, I consider Jalen Petrie a linebacker in nickel. That's the really hard. And now this is where the film study, the previous experience playing against them, all of those things are that you've just. If you watch enough reps of it, you can start to get a feel for hopefully some tells or just indicators about just how whether it's run or pass. Yeah. Just the run pass indicators. Alshire is really good at that stuff. The other thing the Colts do really well, they toe the line on illegal offensive linemen downfield in their RPO game. And there was one play in the preseason where they got away with it. The left guard was about 3.5 yards downfield on a pass, and they didn't get flagged for it. If I'm D'Amico, that's part of this game too, is being sure that the refs are calling that clean. Yes. That you're pointing out when. So I don't want to be overly technical here for those of you. Just the reason that offensive linemen downfield is illegal is because they've got an unfair advantage when a linebacker is trying to figure out if it's run or pass. Mm-hmm. And if it looks like if it looks like the offensive line is blocking like it's definitely a run, and that's your read, you bite on the play action. So when those guys get away with being 3 yards downfield instead of 2, it's you gotta be on the officials to call that tight. Yeah. And the Colts are really, really good at just towing the line on it.
Yep. Nick Caserio joined us over the last hour or so here. I thought his answer about Kamari Lassiter was interesting. Like at the beginning of camp, they had C.J. Henderson and Jeff Okudah on the outside, and they had Kamari Lassiter on the inside, which is where all the experts were saying, he only runs a 4.6, and so he's going to be at his ceiling. He's probably got to be a slot corner, so we'll see how this goes. And then all of a sudden he starts getting reps on the outside in practice. I'm like, oh, okay. this guy's just as good, if not better, than these other guys that we have.
Right, yeah.
That was like found money early on in the spring activities. Almost.
Yeah, and I think the consistency and the intelligence is everything that they were hoping for when it came to, okay, this guy comes out of the University of Georgia. Kirby Smart does a really good job of coaching these guys, prepping them, and are they going to be prepared to play in the NFL earlier? Same way, they feel about defensive players from a Nick Saban team for years and years, but you got to see them actually do it. I think that's usually the thing that keeps a rookie from playing earlier, is because a defensive coordinator feels like, well, this guy's going to get me fired. Okay, great. He's going to have 10 interceptions, but he's also going to have 10 blown coverages that lead to touchdowns.
Yeah.
And he might be hell on a highlight reel, but he's going to get me fired.
That's funny.
So,
yeah. Yeah, and if he gets 10 interceptions, he ain't going anywhere because everybody looks at the 10 interceptions. You know what I mean? He'll give up 10 interceptions and 15 touchdowns, but he'll make the Pro Bowl because of the interception, so there's no incentive.
It's a young Trayvon Diggs dynamic, where, man, the guy gambles a lot. So that's what you're monitoring is, all right, can I trust this guy?
Right.
Sure, we know he can make plays, but can I trust him? And I think that they just felt very early in the process that Kamari Lassiter could be trusted. So it didn't seem like it even was much of a decision.
No. I mean, that's why I asked the question, because he's been the number one cornerback from like the second week of OTAs. Like it hasn't wavered at all. It's got to help too when you just get better players on the team overall. It's got to help you just get so much of a better gauge of what you actually have. I know that they talk about, Nick and D'Amico talk about Lassiter. Well, he's in Georgia, so he's going against the best there is to offer. Yeah, in college, but he's going against Diggs and Go and Tank Dell in practice every day and holding his own, by the way. And that's where you can really go, okay, this is what he's going to see on Sundays over here.
In which, by the way, also, he's got a lot of experience going against A.D. Mitchell, the rookie receiver for the Colts, because he was at Georgia.
That's right.
Nick, when they drafted Stingley, they mentioned, I can't remember if it was Nick who mentioned it or whomever else, but watching the practice film of Derek Stingley versus Jamar Chase and those guys was actually a factor in their scouting process there. I think they just felt like they had more good intel and info on Derek Stingley versus marquee dudes than they did on Sauce Gardner, so they probably just felt more comfortable with it.
Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were the wide receivers on that team.
So
they're going to be the two highest paid guys.
He had a lot of reps versus some really good wide receivers in college. That's probably one of the non-marquee matchup. Kamari Lassiter was very under-discussed in the national media amongst rookies who are having good years, partly because, look, he only played one preseason game, and Daniel Jones or Brian Daboll or whomever else, they didn't test Kamari Lassiter in that game. So I think that we here locally in Houston probably have seen and talked a lot more about Kamari Lassiter than anybody else. When I'm reading previews of this Colts game, I don't expect to see a whole lot of discussion about Kamari Lassiter in there, but he really is he's going to get tested. Shane Steichen's no dummy, and he obviously knows exactly what Derek Stingley is capable of, but he doesn't know about Kamari Lassiter and what he's going to look like as a pro, so he's going to get tested.